The Brazilian horror character Zé do Caixão, known in the U.S. as Coffin Joe, is many things to many people. To some, he's a spook show horror host. Others, he's a sadist. Others, he's a philosopher, a snidely whiplash, a bad man, a troubled soul, a lost monster on the plane of life, seeking to perpetuate his bloodline. Oh my! In the U.S., he's a cult. Within a cult. He's a cult character. Weird movie fans know him. Fans of Something Weird Video know him. He has gained some traction in the UX amongst metalheads, horror fans, people who heard from him from Sepultura, from Brazilian, Latin American horror fans who've brought him over into the United States. He's a cult character. In the U.S., as I said, he's a cult within a cult. But the man behind Coffin Joe, Jose Mojica Marins, is a character unto himself. And the Coffin Joe films of the 60s, the first initial films, At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul and This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse, are just utterly unique, classic horror films. And if you haven't seen them, you need to check them out. So the story of Coffin Joe starts with the creator of Coffin Joe, who is a Brazilian, Jose Mojica Marins. Marins tells a story of his early life growing up in an eclectic and migrant family of artists. His father was a bullfighter. In fact, I think multiple areas of his family were bullfighters. Father a bullfighter, mother a tango dancer. They moved around Brazil and eventually settled with his father managing a theater. And Marins, like many young filmmakers, found himself in the projection booth of the movie theater, watching movies constantly. He would eat in the movie theater. He would experience life in the movie theater. He would watch people watching movies in the movie theater. He tells a story of one of the first movies he ever saw when they put him in the projection booth. He went into the window there, and one of the first things he saw was a hygiene film. Was a film, a gigantic close-up of a woman's genitals with venereal disease, and it made this weird mark on young Marins. I'm sure it did. And so he watched many films. He watched many classic films. He'd watch people watch Charlie Chaplin and watch all these classic film stars in that theater. And so he grew up like many young filmmakers. Other kids were asking for bicycles and toys. He'd ask for a camera. He started making movies in Super 8. He started making movies in 16 millimeter. Eventually moved to 35 millimeter. And his early films, he made a Western that he said was the first movie in Brazil that was shot in widescreen. And it was the first movie in Brazil that had nudity in it. And it was one of his first clashes with the Catholic Church. Brazil is a very Catholic country, very religious country. And Marins strikes me as somebody who wants to rebel, who wants to buck against the prevailing logic. And he started making other movies. One time he made this movie that he said was just cursed. It was like the lead actress got into a car crash and died. Then he cast somebody else, and she died. She got sick and got tuberculosis. And then, well, no, I think the first actress that he cast drowned in a swimming pool. Then he cast the actress who died in a car crash, and then but it was, basically he couldn't finish the movie because the movie was cursed. Weird things happened around Marins. And he started making some other movies. He made that Western. He was going to make this troubled youth film, kind of like a Blackboard Jungle type of movie. And because he wanted to get in good with the Catholic Church, because he was a practicing Catholic. He was very religious, so he wanted to do a good movie that the establishment would like. But then he got sick. He got real ill, apparently, and he had this one day and night for hours and hours. He had this fever dream, this hallucination, this nightmare of this dark figure dragging him down into his own grave. and he saw his tombstone the day he was born, the day he died. He didn't want to know the day he died. And he woke up and he had this idea for this character, this Coffin Joe character, and this movie, this horror movie, which apparently had been in his mind to make a horror movie for a while, but now he had the idea. And he set about creating the character of Zedou Cajon, Coffin Joe, in that first movie, At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, 1964. And it's a classic movie. I mean, it's the story, the character, and we don't really know a lot where the character comes from in the story. He just kind of appears. He is this character with long fingernails, dressed in black with a cape and a top hat, and he's a gravedigger. He's a mortuary attendant, and we see him in the first scene. He just appears at a funeral, and Coffin Joe, the character of Coffin Joe, just basically spends the entire movie in search of a woman who will give birth to his son, to carry on his lifeline. That is Coffin Joe's main drive. And throughout the film, it's just like basically Coffin Joe kills everybody who gets in his way. I mean, it's this it's this small, superstitious rural town, and nobody's a fan of Coffin Joe. I think it's like many world cultures and in many places, especially in rural communities, the people who worked with the dead, the mortuary attendants, the grave diggers, they were in their own class. People didn't really want to hang around with them. And Coffin Joe is an outsider. He's a rebel, and he's a blasphemer. Most importantly, the character of Coffin Joe is incredibly blasphemous. That we see at the beginning of the film, he eats meat on a holy day. He goes and eats meat on a holy day. He flaunts it. There's the procession of the minister and the congregation. And he's eating meat in front of them and laughing his head off. He's blasphemous. He doesn't believe in God. He doesn't believe in hell. He doesn't believe in angels or demons. He only believes in himself, the power of himself, a free, liberated man who has one task, which is to carry on his bloodline. He does have a friend in the film, though, Antonio. I don't know what the hell is going on with Antonio, why he's a friend of Coffin Joe's, and nothing really explained. So the whole movie is just the convolutions of Coffin Joe, and if you get in his way, watch out. It's a movie that is it's a black and white film, beautiful black and white. It was a very low budget movie. The story of behind the making of the movie is that Marins had very little money to make it. He only had like 100 minutes of raw negative to make a 80-some minute film. None of his crew thought he could make it. He initially did not want to play Coffin Joe, but people pushed him into doing it. He's like, you should do this character, and he didn't have anybody else to cast. He was paying the crew by the day, so he just had to jump in there and do it. And just become this. He had this long beard that was a family promise to grow this long beard because of his illness. I think his fingernails were fake. He'd started growing them a little bit, but I think they were partially fake. And you can just tell throughout the film. I mean, the charisma and the magnetic pull of Coffin Joe in this film as he's doing these awful, horrible things. But he does these things, and then he goes on these histrionic rants about how everybody's a dope and these people are dead and I am the only person, I'm alive. And it's been described, the Coffin Joe films have been described as a mix of Herschel Gordon Lewis with the philosophy and the weirdness of Alejandro Jodorowsky. And I can see that, there is some elements of Jodorowsky there. I mean, the whole philosophy, the disturbed philosophy of Coffin Joe, and the weirdness that surrounds him. I mean, the film is punctuated by these screams and yells and cries and this very masculine, kind of aggressive, roaring soundtrack, and the film begins with Coffin Joe speaking to you and speaking these riddles. Many of Marin's films begin with a riddle, like, what is life? It is the beginning of death. What is death? It's the end of life. What is you? What is terror? What is, and it's just, and it's these things, these arguments that kind of collapse and pull in on them. And it almost is meant to confuse you. You're not meant to understand in some ways. It's almost meant to kind of hypnotize you, to put you into this confused fugue state where it kind of opens you up to the weird, strange ideas that you're going to see in the movie. I mean, it's a unique film, and I think to describe the Coffin Joe at Midnight I'll Take Your Soul as having any resemblance to Herschel Gordon Lewis, I think where the Herschel Gordon Lewis stuff comes in. And by the way, this is a 1964 movie. I mean, Blood Feast is 1963. This is very early film. It's a very, very, very early film. In some ways, it is a gore film. You know, I mean, it's very violent, very vicious. I mean, Coffin Joe, I mean, he will hit people, he will strike people. There's the scene, he always goes, there's a few of these scenes in the film where he'll go into the bar, the local tavern of this small rural town, and he'll just wreak havoc with everybody. He'll just mess with everybody, and he severs people's hands, severs people's fingers, and it's a real bloody scene. You really see it, and I mean, it's really vicious. Low budget, but I think it's very well done. I mean, there are many scenes which are just one take of Marins. He must have had to really have his dialogue down, because he does these scenes, and many times one take. He only had like 100 minutes of negative. He didn't have a lot of footage to do this. I mean, it really is, the film works. It's a low-budget film. It's a low-budget film, but it works on the weird ideas, the charisma of this one guy, Marins, playing this Coffin Joe character. And there is a cheapness to it, but again, there is just such an aggressiveness to it. And to see such an explicit, aggressive type of gore film from 1964, it's really unique. Well, okay. Also, the name of the character, because his nickname is Zedu Cajon, which translates as Joseph of the Casket, Joseph of the Coffin. When in the early 90s, when these movies were being distributed in the U.S. by Something Weird Video, Mike Rainey, Something Weird Video, Mike Rainey got in touch with Andrei Brzezinski, who's a writer, a journalist, lived in both the United States and Brazil, and was really instrumental in the resurgence of Marins, resurgence and the re-examination, the rebirth of Coffin Joe in the 90s. The story goes, and I don't know if the story is true, that Mike Rainey gave Zedu Cajon the U.S. name of Coffin Joe. The idea is that Zay is like a slang. It's like Joseph for Joe. Zay is short for Jose or Joseph, and the character's name, the actual character's name, is not Coffin Joe, as I said. It's a nickname. His real name and his full name in the films is Joseph Josephus Joseph Zanatus or Zanatus. I think Marins made that name up because it's Satanus backwards. So when Mike Rainey heard the name, but in the films, because he's like a mortuary attendant, he's a grave digger. They call him Joseph of the Coffin, Zedu Cajon. When he heard that, he's like, oh, Coffin Joe, not Joseph of the Coffin. But I think it alienates Brazilians to a certain extent, because I don't think anybody in Brazil is really named Joe. I don't think there's many. I don't think Joe is a very common name in Brazil. But as far as the U.S., it works. I like the name Coffin Joe. It really shows in many ways the marketing brilliance of Mike Rainey, because Coffin Joe, in a sense, it it's easy to say, it's easy to remember, it's memorable, and it kind of plays off to the goofy 1930s, 40s type of, 50s spook show type of goofy monster movie thing. The kind of movies that like Something Weird Video was really interested in. Like the K. Gordon Murray, like the Spanish, the Mexican monster movies, like the Brainiac and stuff like that. Those classic black and white monster movies. You could see At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul carrying on in the lineage of those films, but in its energy and in the pure sadism and energy and the passion of the character of Coffin Joe, the film is just beyond the kind of low budget Brazilian horror movie kind of trappings. It shines above that. So, At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, 1964. Coffin Joe, it becomes a kind of a phenomenon. They have posters all throughout Sao Paulo, and just At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul is a hell of a name. Even translated into English, it means it's just like, what the hell I gotta watch that movie. At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul. And he comes up with, people are interested in financing the sequel, and he has more money, and he makes the sequel, which is This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse. This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse continues directly after the end of At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, which is Coffin Joe supposed to die at the end of that, but spoiler alert, he doesn't. Okay, there's a trilogy, so I'm not really spoiling much. You have to know these movies often end with the main character dying, and they're kind of reincarnated at the end of the film. But At Midnight, This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse. I really love this movie. I think it's everything that we loved about At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, but I think amped up a notch. The film looks as good as At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul. Beautiful cinematography, but better. Coffin Joe kills everybody in At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul. At the beginning of This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse, he's in court, and he's like, nobody... He's free. We couldn't find anything to convict him. Not enough evidence. So he's back in a town. I don't know if it's the town, but he's back in town and back in on his old ways of trying to find a bride in order to continue on his bloodline. And he starts this film off with a just going and kidnapping a bunch of young ladies and starting off with a bang. And it's I love the film, the way the film moves. To me, it feels like At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul is kind of a plotting film that you're kind of waiting for the next thing. There's not a lot of elements in the movie. That's the problem. The characters are very thin. The most full character is Coffin Joe, and you don't really know a lot about him. It's just basically watching Coffin Joe enact his will throughout the film. In This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse, it's obvious Marins thought a lot more about characters, and so you have the characters of these women, and there are some young women who are into Coffin Joe, who want to carry on his task. There's different. The townspeople are now. There's a few fully formed characters. There's the general, who kind of is like the unofficial mayor of the town, who kind of runs the town, and then there's Trunkador, the strong man of the town, and then he has his own kind of mob, and so there's all these dynamics of different characters that they can kind of play off of, and they're all playing off around Marins as Coffin Joe, who is back, and he is back with a vengeance. In the original movie, his house was kind of very humble house. In this movie, he has in This Might Your Possess Your Corpse, rather. In the second film, he has it's become like a gothic mansion, and he has like a dungeon where he has the old teetering rock. He's torturing people with a rock. He has a torture chamber, and in that way, it reminds me of Blood Feast versus 2000 Maniacs. Like in Blood Feast, it was barely a movie, and then in 2000 Maniacs, it looked like almost kind of like half a movie, but just like in 2000 Maniacs, Coffin Joe has old teetering rock. He has a big rock that he can torture people with. Now that I think about it, it's a good comparison between Herschel Gordon Lewis and Coffin Joe, because in 2000 Maniacs, Herschel Gordon Lewis he has this gigantic rock prop. He doesn't really do a lot with it. And Coffin Joe, in this little tiny studio in Brazil with this rock, that compared to Herschel Gordon Lewis's rock is tiny. The suspense that he builds up in this torturing scene where he shows a rat being killed, and then he's like, oh, now you're gonna go underneath that rock, and the suspense of boom, boom, boom. Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible scene. There's so many scenes in this film. They're so well edited. They're so well shot. They're just so, they're captured in this inky blackness of the cinematography by the really brilliant cinematography by this Italian Giorgio Attili, who shot all of the Coffin Joe movies, or all of the, he's a late Giorgio Attili. Of course, he didn't do the third one, I believe, in the 2000s. But it's a beautiful, I mean, the look of this film, the lushness of it, it's obviously, the budget is much bigger. Coffin Joe now has a henchman. He has an Igor. He has a Bruno character. And the whole, I mean, this is a real, to me, I liked At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, and you have to watch At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul to watch this. Maybe you don't, because, I mean, it does recap it at the beginning. I think This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse is a much better movie than At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul. I think that people who hear about Coffin Joe and then they go to At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, because in a way it does have a better title in some ways. It has a beautiful title. And it's also the first movie. You don't want to watch the sequel first. But, so, usually. But I think in this film, if you can get past the initial movie and learning about Coffin Joe, this movie is great. I mean, those scenes at night in Coffin Joe's bedroom with the inky darkness and the black, beautiful. And then, of course, we have the climax of this film where Coffin Joe is dragged to hell like Marin's dream. He is dragged into hell, and the film, which is black and white at that point, bursts into color. It's hell in Eastman color, as the advertising for this film proclaimed. And it is a real beautiful sequence worthy of any Kenneth Anger experimental movie. It's a beautiful, oh my God, incredible film, incredibly well shot film, wonderful film. The whole ending of, and I think that the look of the film is amped up. The drama of the film is amped up. Coffin Joe is definitely amped up. I love that coat that he wears in this movie. He's looking a little bit shabby in the original film, because he was wearing, in the original At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, I mean, he just pulled together his costume. He had like his black Sunday suit. He had a cape that he found in the studio, and he borrowed a top hat, and he's like, I'm Coffin Joe. He still has the basic same outfit in This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse, but it's obvious it's developed. He wears this overcoat a lot of the time, and this gigantic black overcoat, and he looks very charismatic and dashing, and he's a villain, but the film does very successfully make the turn in that you start going with Coffin Joe, and the whole dynamics of the whole plot with the townspeople plotting against Coffin Joe. You start to, in a way, feel sorrow for the monster. You know, it's very much like a Frankenstein's monster type thing, where you start kind of feeling, you go with him, and at the end of the film, you start feeling compassion and sorrow for him at the end of the movie, you know, when he's not able to accomplish his task of having a bride. And I thought that whole thing really worked. At the very, very, very end of At Midnight You Take His Soul, he freaks out, and you're supposed to feel fear, compassion for him. But the dynamics of Coffin Joe, very interesting, very interesting. I like At Midnight You Take Your Soul, but then This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse, I'm mad about. I'm crazy about. I think it's a great movie. So the Coffin Joe story at that point ended with This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse. After that, Coffin Joe started becoming a brand. He became this iconic figure in Italian, in a Brazilian, in film and culture. He started having Coffin Joe deodorants, Coffin Joe whatever, Coffin Joe. They would have Coffin Joe funeral services. You could buy Coffin Joe coffins. It went fully into the marketing, but he would make some other movies, but his next big movie was Awakening of the Beast. So that is where we will have to pick up our story.
On behalf of the motion picture industry, welcome to the world of home video entertainment.